The cold morning air seeped through the rough canvas of his camp tent, making Arthur shiver. His body ached from the dampness and the hard cot, a far cry from the mythical chambers of Camelot. Today would reveal how King Arthur eats, battles the biting cold, and struggles to maintain the fragile unity of his world. We'll witness his daily life, his physical limitations, and how he lives each hour far removed from the legends where every sip of water and every glance carries a hidden meaning. Arthur, a name steeped in myth, whose glory struck fear into his enemies and whose valor the Britons depended on, awoke not in a lavish castle, but in a raw, bone-chilling darkness. A thin layer of frost coated the inside of the rough fabric, and every exhale turned into a cloud of vapor. He struggled to open his sleep-swollen eyes, feeling the stiffness in his neck. On the floor lay a crumpled, well-worn woolen tunic, smelling of campfire smoke and damp earth. His fingers, calloused from the sword hilt and constant cold, struggled to pick up a few dry twigs to rekindle the glowing embers in a small brazier. This simple physical act bore little resemblance to the image of a great king in shining armor, but this was how his day began on the edge of the world. On this day, we will see Arthur as myths recede before harsh reality. Today, we will see Arthur eat, sleep, battle the cold, and try to hold together the fragile unity of his world, where every sip of water and every glance carries a hidden meaning. Arthur is not the knight of legend in shining armor. Instead, he is a Celtic chieftain, an heir to Roman traditions, forced to unite scattered Brittonic tribes. His lineage, possibly linked to Roman military commanders, lends him an aura of legitimacy in the eyes of some. Yet, for many others, he remains just one among many. His authority rests on personal charisma, sheer willpower, and a relentless struggle for survival in a world where every single day is a test. He doesn't rule from the fabled Camelot, but from a rough yet functional temporary camp, fortified by a palisade. In the distance, misty hills loom, concealing both friends and foes alike. A worn map lies on his table, charting the movements of Saxons and Brittonic tribes. Next to the map is a heavy bronze dagger, always ready for battle. The creak of leather straps and the muffled voices of guards can be heard from the tent entrance, doing their duty despite the cold. A cold wind seeps through the gaps, making the oil lamp's flame flicker. Today, Arthur faces secret negotiations with Lord Cador, whose loyalty wavers. Cador is a powerful yet ambitious Brittonic chieftain whose lands lie along a strategically important route. His reputation is inconsistent. He values personal gain above the common good. Arthur knows full well that Cador is already engaging in secret dealings with the Saxons, which makes him particularly dangerous. Should Cador defect to the enemy, it could be the beginning of the end for everything Arthur has built over the years. The fragile and hard-won unity of the Britons would crumble. His own life, along with the fate of the entire Briton resistance, would be at stake. Indeed, if Cador were to side with the Saxons, it could truly spell the end for everything Arthur has painstakingly built and place his own life in grave peril. Arthur struggled to rise from his hard cot, his muscles aching from the cold and discomfort. He pulled on several layers of coarse wool clothing, an under tunic, then a thicker outer one, cinching it with a leather belt. The scratchy fabric felt rough against his skin. Cold water from a leather waterskin stung his face, leaving a tingling, bracing sensation that chilled him to the bone. Outside, he could hear the crunch of snow under the guards' feet and the occasional whinny of horses, reminding him of time's relentless march. His meager breakfast consisted of a piece of stale bread and dried meat, which he washed down with murky water from the same waterskin. The smell of stale bread and salty meat filled the tent, mixing with the lingering smoke from last night's fire. Arthur's fingers, slightly numb from the cold, clutched the piece of bread. He thought about the upcoming negotiations with Lord Cador, and these thoughts mingled with his physical discomfort. His reputation, his standing, and even his life all depended on the outcome of today's events. Every sip of water, every bite of food, was a reminder of the fragile world he was trying to hold together. He had no right to luxury or comfort. His only privilege was the opportunity to fight for his people's survival. Thoughts of Cador, of his possible betrayal, weighed heavily on him, but Arthur knew he couldn't show weakness. He had to be strong, even if his body was weary and his soul was full of worries. Suddenly, Arthur's loyal squire, young Blaise, burst into his tent. He was breathless, his cheeks red from the cold, his breathing ragged. Arthur, who had been calmly eating stale bread, froze. A piece of meat caught in his throat. Blaise delivered disturbing news about Lord Cater. Cater was approaching the camp, but he was accompanied not only by his warriors, but also by several Saxon scouts. This meant that Cater was already negotiating with the enemy, that he had already betrayed them or was ready to. Arthur's gaze hardened, and his hands involuntarily clenched into fists. The cold air that rushed in with Blaise seemed even more piercing than the morning frost. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. The thought of Saxon scouts accompanying Cater filled him with bitterness and rage. Cater's news completely disrupted the day's usual routine, disturbing the morning's peace. Arthur's primary objective for the day was now clear. He had to convince Cater to remain loyal to the Britons, despite Cater's growing ambitions and his fear of the Saxons. If he succeeded, the unity of the Britons would be preserved, and Arthur's own power would be strengthened. Should he fail, Cater would defect to the enemy, weakening the Britons' resistance and jeopardizing not only Arthur's position, but also his life. This was a challenge that demanded immediate action and utmost concentration. Arthur made his way to the negotiation tent, passing through the encampment. His heavy leather boots squelched in the thick, muddy ground. The smell of smoke from the campfires mingled with the stench of unwashed bodies and excrement filling the air. He saw the tired, wary, yet resolute faces of his warriors, who looked at him with respect and hope. Children played in the mud near the tents, while women prepared meager meals over open hearths. Suddenly, a sharp crack of a whip rang out, followed by a pained moan. Arthur stopped. His gaze fell upon a young warrior tied to a post. Blood ran down his back, already crisscrossed with bloody welts. He was being punished for stealing provisions, and his cries of pain echoed through the camp, a stark reminder of the harsh laws of survival. In the punished man's eyes, Arthur saw desperation and pain, and this scene of brutality and despair struck a nerve with him, reminding him of the fragile peace he was trying to preserve. A cold wind cut through his own clothes, yet he felt a burning heat from the scene. This scene, marked by poverty and brutality, was part of his everyday reality. He watched as the guards turned away, indifferent, and other warriors tried not to look. This clash with reality, where hunger and fear drove people to break the rules and punishment was swift and merciless, once again showed Arthur just how thin the ice beneath his feet was. The world around him was on the brink, and he, the king, was the one who had to prevent its collapse. Inside the negotiation tent, it was dimly lit by a few oil lamps, casting long shadows on the rough walls. The scent of Cater's sweat and expensive leather mingled with the smell of damp earth that permeated everything. Arthur sat on a rough wooden chair, his back straight, hands clasped on his knees. His face remained impassive, his voice calm and firm, despite the inner turmoil. Cater, by contrast, sprawled in his chair, his gaze arrogant, sweeping over Arthur with open defiance. He spoke of the unity of the Britons, of honour, of the common Saxon threat, and the necessity of standing together. He felt the cold seeping through the thin fabric of his tunic, intensifying the tension. At one point, trying to conceal a slight tremor in his hand, a mix of the cold and his own inner agitation, Arthur awkwardly brushed the edge of the table. His fingers slipped across the surface, damp with condensation, leaving a wet trail. He frowned almost imperceptibly, striving to regain control over his body, over this minor human slip that betrayed his humanity behind the king's mask. The tense silence pressed in, broken only by the occasional crackle of the lamps. Cater listened without interruption, his face remaining unreadable, but Arthur could feel every word being weighed, every sentence scrutinized. This was more than just a political game. It was a battle of wills, where every gesture, every glance held significance, and even the slightest awkwardness could be interpreted as weakness, a crack in the king's armor. In the middle of the negotiations, just as Cater was almost ready to pledge his loyalty, a breathless scout burst into the tent. He was covered in mud, his hair disheveled, and fell to his knees before Arthur. His voice trembled with urgency and fear as he delivered the terrible news. The Saxons, taking advantage of Cater's absence, had raided his lands, driving off his cattle and seizing hostages. Kaider's face twisted with rage and fear as he sprang to his feet, turning crimson. He accused Arthur of failing to protect his lands, claiming his promises were worthless. Arthur feels his carefully laid plan crumbling in an instant. Cold sweat trickles down his temples and his stomach clenches with anxiety. He feels a sharp pain in his stiff neck like a dagger's thrust. The smell of burning wood and smoke seems to already fill the tent, foreshadowing destruction. His gaze darts between Cador and the scout, trying to find a way out of this trap. The day's earlier plans are shattered, and Arthur realizes he's losing his chance to rest or eat, his strength already failing. This complication hits not just his political standing, but his very body. Fatigue, hunger, and nervous tension, it's all piling up on him now. The choice he can't escape now feels both political and deeply personal, even physical. Arthur must decide. Either he loses Cador and his lands, or he makes concessions that could undermine his own authority. Arthur was alone in his tent, enveloped by darkness. He sat on the edge of his cot, his gaze fixed on Excalibur, its blade dimly glinting in the light of an oil lamp. The sword's hilt felt cold to the touch. He ran his fingers over the rough wool of the blanket, feeling its scratchiness. The tent was silent save for the whisper of the wind outside, seeping through the gaps, only deepening his feeling of loneliness. He was tormented by the thought of having to make a personal sacrifice for the unity of the Britons. He feared his decision might be perceived as weakness, a sign that he was unable to protect his allies, but Arthur understood that without Cador, resistance against the Saxons would weaken, leading to even greater losses. He recalled Merlin's words about the price of power and how a true king must be ready for any sacrifice, even if it seemed unbearable. He felt the weight of a crown that wasn't on his head, but whose burden pressed down on him. The metallic scent of the sword mingled with the smell of his own sweat, a reminder of the day's tension. Arthur clenched his jaw, making a decision that would change his future. He would offer Cador a portion of his lands and help him reclaim his lost territories, even if it undermined his own authority. The survival of the Britons was paramount, far more important to him than personal glory or an unblemished reputation. Arthur was ready to pay a high price for unity, even if it meant risking a loss of some of his power and respect. For him, the survival of the Britons outweighed any personal glory. That evening, Arthur met with Cador again. Smoke from the campfire stung his eyes, filling the air with the smell of burning wood and boiled vegetables. Arthur sat by the fire, holding a wooden bowl of hot but tasteless stew. His body ached with fatigue, every muscle sore after a long, tense day. He announced his decision. Cador would receive land and assistance in reclaiming what had been seized. Cador's face showed surprise at first, then clear satisfaction. Some of Arthur's advisors looked at him with distrust, while others felt relief, understanding that this decision, difficult as it was, had spared them from immediate war. Arthur noticed Cador, sitting opposite him, now looked at him with a new, almost condescending smile. Some warriors passing by lowered their eyes, avoiding his gaze, while others laughed excessively loudly, trying to hide their discomfort. Arthur felt the cold stare of one of his old comrades, who clearly disapproved of this compromise. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his decision. Small cracks were starting to show in his image. Physical exhaustion, the doubt in the eyes of some warriors, and Cador's changed attitude all indicated that today had changed a great deal. Unity, though fragile, was preserved, but the price for it was high. Arthur felt that these changes were just beginning, and their consequences would be felt for a long time to come. Darkness enveloped Arthur in his tent. He lay staring at the ceiling, where the swaying fabric cast shadows. The distant howl of a wolf and the creak of trees in the wind seeped through the rough walls. His body ached with weariness, but his mind refused to rest, replaying the day's events. It wasn't just a day of negotiations, but a day when he sacrificed a part of himself for the common good. The decision he made today secured temporary unity, but it also sowed the seeds of future doubts and discord. Excalibur, lying beside him on the coarse blanket, felt cold and alien. The sword, a symbol of his power, now felt heavier, as if it had absorbed all the bitterness and tension of the day. Arthur ran his hand over the coarse blanket, feeling its roughness. The smell of dampness and smoke drifted in even here, reminding him of the harsh reality of the camp. His eyes reflected the weariness and the weight of the decision he had made, a decision that, he felt, had only postponed the inevitable. He understood that the consequences of this day, when he had sacrificed a part of his power for unity, would be felt far beyond the camp. This day, filled with cold and tension, would become one of many that shaped the legend of a king who fought for unity at the edge of the world, and